South African President Cyril Ramaphosa went to the White House hoping for a reset in his country's relations with the United States. Instead, he had to defend himself against allegations thrown at him by US President Donald Trump. The two men met the press in one of President Trump's fireside chats, during which he held up printed-out articles and played a video accusing President Ramaphosa of failing to address the alleged persecution of South Africa's white minority. Relations between the US and South Africa soured this year over a range of issues, including the American president's repeated unsubstantiated claim that white farmers in South Africa face a genocide. Mr. Trump has granted refugee status to dozens of white South Africans. Now, here is President Ramaphosa pushing back against those claims of violence against white farmers.
Our Constitution guarantees and protects the sanctity of tenure of land ownership. And that Constitution protects all South Africans with regard to land ownership. However, we do say, because we've got to deal with the past, the government, and as your government also has the right to expropriate land for public use.
And you're doing that.
And we've never really gotten underway with that. And we are going to be doing so.
You're taking people's land away
we have not.
From them. And those people, in many cases, are being executed.
Yeah, let's get more on this from our correspondents Janelle Dumalaon in Washington, D.C. and Dianne Hawker in Johannesburg. Welcome both. Let's start with you, Janelle. These White House fireside chats are fast becoming notorious. President Trump repeated his unsubstantiated claims about a genocide of white South Africans today.
Yes, I think both you, Phil, and Dianne would agree when I say that this was clearly another reality show moment in the Trump presidency. Trump seemed very determined to have this confrontation. He showed those videos. Some of them featured Julius Malema. He's this opposition figure in South Africa that calls for the expropriation of land from white farmers. Important that he is not anyone in government. This is not government policy as such. You mentioned that he held up printed out articles, which he said chronicled the deaths of white farmers. He kept saying over and over, white farmers are getting their land taken away from them. They're getting murdered. He made repeated references to burial sites. He used graphic language. He talked about chop heads. Now, he was also just impervious to any sort of attempt from the South African delegation to correct his impression, to correct these unverified claims of genocide. I'm sure Dianne will speak to that a little bit more. But this was clearly a moment where he decided to double down on these claims and in the full view of the press corps cameras, which he invited to witness this particular confrontation that he really, really did want to have.
Dianne Hawker, the clip we played there of President Ramaphosa was one of the few in which he managed to speak for any length of time uninterrupted. He did seem to struggle to get a word in.
Yes, absolutely, Phil. You could see that President Ramaphosa was really trying at times when press questions were being asked or when President Trump was responding to try and get just some kind of explanation in. And sometimes he was cut off by President Trump. Sometimes he was ignored by him. But he still tried to make an effort to get those answers in. I'm sure the South African delegation was expecting a tough meeting. I don't think they were expecting this kind of meeting. Ramaphosa went in there with a number of people, and he did try to get his point across by speaking himself and also welcoming other people to speak, such as South Africa's Agriculture Minister, who is from the Democratic Alliance, a different party to Ramaphosa's ANC. And he also welcomed some of the kind of celebrities that he had brought. Ernie Els, a prominent South African golfer, spoke. So you could see he was trying to use other mechanisms where he couldn't get the point across to try and see if Trump would listen to some of the rest of the delegation.
Janelle, relations between the US and South Africa have been strained, but was there an expectation that this meeting would be so confrontational?
No, and as Dianne mentioned, they were not expecting this kind of meeting. I don't think they were expecting to be ambushed in this way. And you could really tell with the way the meeting started. They walked into the Oval Office wanting to talk about aid, wanting to talk about trade, wanting to talk about the access that the U.S. could get from South African critical minerals. They clearly said to themselves that their brief was going to be to focus more on these areas of cooperation than on conflict. It's also, Dianne mentioned the golfers. It was also clear to them that they were really trying to find common ground with Donald Trump there. They even brought 2 golfers with them. So there was always a chance for, the kind of meeting, kind of blow-up meeting that we saw happen between Trump and Zelensky just a few months ago, just because we have seen that before. But I think it's fair to say that this deserves its own category.
OK, so Dianne Hawker, Donald Trump, impervious to arguments from President Ramaphosa. How does the South African president, therefore, turn his views around?
I think, Phil, it's important to note that this isn't the only interaction that they'll have. And perhaps that's where we'll see some change and some more of a listening ear from President Donald Trump. As Janelle mentioned there, the South African delegation was really trying to focus on the positives of a potential relationship, talking about minerals, areas where the U.S. could help, even with the security situation, saying, America's got the technology, we've got the crime, let's put our heads together and see how we can solve it. And behind closed doors, those are the kinds of things that the South African delegation will really focus on more. They also mentioned, for example, that there are critical minerals that the U.S. needs for some of its projects and for its reindustrialization. That's the kind of thing that they would need to focus on in the behind-the-scenes meetings where there are no news cameras, to try and kind of temper the tone from the U.S. government and from Donald Trump.
OK, Dianne Hawker in Johannesburg, Janelle Dumalaon in Washington. Thank you both.